How do I remember my school days? Not very happily. I've told you about Warburton School. When I left there, I went to Lymm Grammar School. Mum had gone there, so had Woolley and Lenny and Uncle Bob. And I think Mum always wanted one of us to go there. So I went from a school with less than 30 pupils to a school with over 1,000. And I didn't know anybody because my friend Sue and another friend, Pat, from Warburton School, both went to Altrincham Grammar School for girls.
I went to Padgate Infant School, which was on Padgate Bridge, which was the old church hall. There was just one big classroom that they used to mark off with screens. And I went there till I was for about a year and a half. Because my mother used to work at a house on Padgate Bridge, so she used to drop me off at school and then go to work cleaning at this house called Mr. Antrobus's.
Well, I remember Warburton Junior School we went to first, and then when I went to North Kestrian Grammar School in Altrincham.
I was a rather unhappy child, I'm afraid. I didn't get to know anybody really till probably the end of the first year. I was always on my own in the playground because most people had come from larger primary schools and they'd all come with friends. So although I, spoke to people in class at playtime, they were always with their own friends. And then one day Joy came over to me, sitting lonely on my bench eating my Kit Kat, and asked if I'd like to play with them. So I became friendly with Joy and Midge.
Then when I got to about 6.5, my mum took me away and I went to Woolston School at Hall Road in Woolston. And it was the only school at that time that had an indoor swimming pool. So we used to have indoor swimming lessons every week.
I didn't really enjoy school. North Kestrian didn't have many amenities. It didn't really have. We had to walk to a football pitch, somebody else's football pitch, and cricket we had to walk to either Timperley or Broadheath to a football pitch which they must have rented, a cricket pitch they must have rented.
Dorothy Wardle was also in our class, so we became closer friends. When we moved, well, she wasn't in our class until we got to fourth year, so then I became more friendly with her.
The infant school was great. Then when I left there, I went to a brand new school. It had only been opened about 8 months when I went, and it was Woolston High School. And I don't think I really had a favourite teacher, but I didn't have one that I didn't like either.
One or two teachers were. There was one of the favourite teachers was Mr. Wadsworth, a little chap with glasses. He taught us geography, and he used to take us for football as well. And he used to like a game of football. He used to join in with us, but he was, being small, he's probably about the same size of us. But we were probably, when we were about 12, we were probably about 7 stone. But one of the lads, Martin Clothier, was about 10 stone, but there wasn't an ounce of fat on him. He was a really big lad, and we were playing football. We'd been playing about 10 minutes, and Martin Clothier brought Mr. Wadsworth down, a hell of a challenge, and he got up a bit shaken. And 10 minutes later, another big tackle, and Mr. Wadsworth was on the floor again. So next week, Mr. Wadsworth didn't partake in the football. He decided to stay on the touchline and watch us.
I wasn't academic. I did struggle with some subjects, although I was good at maths. But then when I got into the fourth year, because I was in a general form and half the class were doing commerce, which was shorthand typing, etc., we had to drop maths and do bookkeeping, which you can't imagine happening nowadays.
I think probably the subject I hated most was sewing. I couldn't get it right. My favourite subject was probably domestic science. I liked geography. I loved maps. And I love, believe it or not, I actually love sport because our sports teacher was absolutely brilliant. And she encouraged me all the way. I was never very good at it, but she was very, very encouraging. And her name was Jean Northover. And funny enough, when we lived in Culture Hall Drive, 2 doors down, her nephew came to live there because her maiden name was Abby. And Abby's moved in next door, but two to us, the other side from Kirsty. And that was her nephew. So there was a bit of a connection there.
There was another teacher, Mr. Holiday, used to teach English, and he used to like to join in playing football. And in those days, a big heavy leather ball, and Martin Claudio had a hell of a kick on him, and he kicked this ball right into Mr. Holiday's goalies. He went down for about a quarter of an hour. Of course, we all thought it was hilarious. And eventually he recovered, and he never seemed too keen to play with us after that.
And I also used to love geography, but I had to drop geography because more people wanted to do history. So I ended up doing history, which I found completely boring because we were doing Pitt, Peel and Walpole, and all we had to do was learn lots of Acts of Parliament and lots of dates, and it just went completely over my head. I was not in the least interested.
Mr. Bird was a nice teacher. He used to teach us English. He was very good. We had one or two that were verging on being lunatics teachers. We had one called, well, we used to call him Noddy because he was highly educated. He'd been to Cambridge and came with a good reputation. And but when he'd be writing on the blackboard, he used to be nodding his head all the time. He was definitely not the full shilling, and he got the nickname Noddy. And he also used to fly off the handle. And I remember one day there was a boy called Revington, and he decided to punish him. And Revington's dad had a builder's merchants apparently, and Revington had a big plastic ruler with Revington's builder's merchants on it. So Noddy picked the big ruler up and got him to hold his hand out, and he hit him so hard with this big plastic ruler that Revington had Revington's builder's merchants imprinted on his hand. Happy days.
So I didn't do terribly well in GCSEs, or GCEs as they were then, except in cookery and needlework. They were my better subjects. So I scraped through English language and English literature, just failed French, and did quite well in cookery and needlework.
Favourite subjects at school? I think I've covered that. Probably domestic science. It was always a good day at home when I cooked for the day and we took it home and ate it for tea.
So favourite teacher would have been Miss Timperley, who was our form teacher. She was our needlework teacher, and I didn't do well in my mocks, so she took me under her wing and used to give me extra help, although I think they marked us quite severely in the mocks. So I'd say she was my favourite teacher, and my least favourite was the history teacher, and I can't remember his name. But he just used to come in, write loads of notes on the board, and then say to us, write those down, learn them, and see you at the next lesson. So he didn't even really attempt to make it interesting for us. So I think I would have been interested in kings and queens and things I could relate to, but I didn't really. I think he put me off politics for life.
Favourite subject at school was, I suppose it was geography or history. I quite liked French as well, but overall I didn't like lessons at all.
So I suppose favourite subject at school, it probably would have been domestic science, cookery and needlework. Yeah, so that's school.
Right, my first boyfriend.
First boyfriend, well,
First girlfriend.
Well, my first boyfriend, what can I say about him? I didn't have many boyfriends, I have to say. There weren't many about. But my next door neighbour, the Manellis,
I used to knock round with a crowd over at Grappan Hall, and we all used to go out together and go to pubs and things. And I went out with one or two of them, but as soon as they started getting serious, I used to run a mile because I wanted to travel and do things. I didn't want to get married and settle down, so I think I always had the itchy feet and a curiosity to see the world, which is why I would have liked to have continued with my geography.
Well, the first girl I think I ever went out with was a friend of Veronica's called Jennifer Barnes, and I took her to the pictures in Altrincham. Caught the bus, took her to the pictures in Altrincham, and then I don't think I went out with her. I went out with her once.
the next door neighbour, the Manellis, they had a nephew called Brian. And he asked could he take me out. I'd only be about 15. And he asked could he take me out. So I met him at the pictures in Warrington. In those days, everybody met outside Boots in Warrington, which was the centre of Warrington. It's not there now. So I met him in Warrington. I had a hat on, not unlike this one, because people dressed up in those days, which was crazy. And we went to the pictures. And he held my hand, and his hand was so sweaty. It was absolutely horrible. It put me right off him. And when we came home, he didn't kiss me or anything because nobody did those sort of things. And he put me back on the bus, and he said, "Can I see you again?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And it was all. He was a very good-looking lad, but he had very, very sweaty hands, and he was a bit BOE, so I couldn't cope with that.
So I suppose the first boy or man I fell in love with was James Peebles Simpson. I met him through the motor club, and we went out together for, I suppose it wasn't that long when I think back, maybe 6 months. And then I went to South Africa to visit my cousins over there, and I was away 6 weeks, and when I came back he'd taken up with his old girlfriend, and so that was the end of that.
I had a few other girlfriends. There was one girlfriend that I never had that wouldn't go out with me because you're most keen on then, aren't you? Was Anna Lee. I had a big crush on Anna, and she'd never go out with me. She was very wise.
So my next boyfriend, which was the love of my life, was Ron Wilson, which is the big joke going on all this time. So I wind everybody up and say he was the love of my life. But really, the love of my life was your dad. And I met your dad. I went out with Ron Wilson for quite a while. He lived in the Lake District. His parents were very nice, but he was cheating on me with one of his mum's neighbour's daughters. Anyway, that's another story.
I first met Mum in the Jolly Thrasher at Broom Edge. I went in with Jeff Anderson one night, and Mum was at the bar with her friend Dee.
And I left home when I was 18 and a half, and I went to live in Lymm. Now, when I was in Lymm, I met a girl that lived in the flat below me called Dee Pritchard, which she was absolutely brilliant. She was such a lovely girl. And your dad was a friend of her boyfriend's. Her boyfriend was Woods, what's his first name? I can't think of his first name. And your dad was a friend of his.
Well, I met David in a pub called, or a restaurant called Bobby Brown's in Solihull.
Jeff knew them, and so we got chatting then, and and then it was getting near New Year, and Dee said to me, "Dot's not got anywhere to go New Year's Eve. Do you think she could come out with you?" So we went out New Year's Eve to a dance.
And when I first met him, I thought he'd just been in the south of France for about 8 weeks, and he was as brown as a berry, even though it was Christmas. And I thought he was so good looking. And I thought, oh gosh, and he knows it. So I wasn't that fussed when I first met him.
I'd been on a flight. Had been made up to a training stewardess. So I'd been on a flight with my friend Sue. Dad had died a few weeks before. So she said that when we got back, her boyfriend Graham would take us out for a meal.
And that was it then. Fell in love and lived happily ever after.
So the three of us were sitting at one table, and a group of friends came in and were sitting at another table and invited us to join them, and I sat next to David. We hadn't met before, although we'd both been drinking in the same pub for many years, and he was actually staying with a close friend of mine, Malcolm.
But anyway, I think he must have been more fussed than me, because the next morning I was in bed about 12 o'clock having a lie in, and there was a bang on my door, and it was your dad. And he'd been to work and he'd finished at 12 o'clock, and on his way home he popped into the flat and he brought me a Frank Sinatra CD, because I told him the nights before that one of my favourite songs was by Frank Sinatra. So he went, not a CD, a long playing record. So he brought me this record, which was very kind of him, and then asked me to go out with him again. And it was getting near to New Year. So he asked me out for New Year's Eve, and we went to the Millstone at Stretton to a dance. Auntie Veron organised the tickets, and we all went there and we danced all night. And I have to say, I fell in love with your dad that night, so that was quite pleasant. And that was on New Year's Eve, and on the 1st of April that year we got engaged to be married. So not had lots of boyfriends, didn't have many at all. The lads I did go out with were all very pleasant and very respectful, and until I met your dad, and then that all changed.
We both ordered strawberries for dessert, and they only had one bowl of strawberries left, so we ended up sharing the strawberries, and discovered a mutual love of Morgan cars and flying, and that was where it all started.
First job. My first job, I've got to put my Sophia Loren glasses on because it makes me look cool.
My first job was with a company called Mining Improvements Limited. They made stemming bags for mines, which seems a bit obscure in Altrincham. And these were long, narrow bags filled with sand, all to very high specifications. And they used to be pushed into the hole when they'd push the dynamite in. The stemming bags used to go in after that to prevent the explosion from coming out of the hole they'd been pushed in through.
My first job was at Frank Marshall and Company Auctioneers.
My first job, I went to work at 15. I left school, and I went to Secretarial College at Padgate and Padgate Lane to Miss Knox. She was called Miss Knox. I did shorthand and typing there, and my first job, Sylvie got me an interview at A. Monk and Company at Padgate.
I was doing shorthand and typing. Mum had sent me to college to do shorthand and typing. The last thing I wanted to do was work in an office, so that was where I ended up.
The main business was Shelford Cattle Market, which dealt in all livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, hens, you name it. And I went for an interview. Dad took me for an interview.
Now, that's where I started, in the personnel department, and my first job was collecting all the clocking on cards for everybody in the whole of Padgate Yard, the work yard and the offices, working out if they'd been late, and they would dock 15 minutes. If they were more than 6 minutes late, they got docked 15 minutes. If they were early, they didn't get any extra. And that was my job, making a record of everything, putting it all on information sheets to send to the cashiers department.
And I was paid £4 a week.
They offered me £2.10 shillings a week as a junior clerk. Now, when you think a junior farm labourer was on £4.5 shillings a week, it was a bit of an insult, really. But I took the job and persevered there for 5 years, which probably were the best working years of my life, really, because it was a wonderful experience and met friends that I'm still in touch with now.
And I worked for Monk and Company for quite a while, as my father did before me, and Auntie Sylvie worked there. She was in the offices, she was the secretary. And then I got moved from personnel, because everybody started off in personnel. And then from personnel, I went to the comptometers operator, where it was a form of computerizing, where you had the punch card machines. And I used to be a punch card operator. So that was quite interesting, and I learned a good trade there.
I wasn't there for too long because maybe a year or so, they moved to Nantwich, so it was out of my reach, and I then went to work in Martin's Bank.
Mr. Marshall was he was known for his great range of hats. You never knew what hat he was going to come to work in. One day I'd have a bowler hat on, next day it might be a deer stalker, and then a flat cap, and then a trilby. The only thing I never saw of him was a top hat, I think. And he was quite a character, a highly intelligent man. But he was a man you could never really get to know. I knew him as well in the first week as I did after 5 years, I think. His partner's Mr. Shilliker. I got on well with him, and he used to take me shooting sometimes. So that was good fun.
I started on £4 2 and sixpence a week, which wasn't bad money. And every year, every September, you got a rise of 10 shillings. So, and then at Christmas, Monk and Company always paid a bonus out. And I used to get about £27 bonus, which was an enormous amount of money. So with my £27, I always bought myself a winter coat, gave my mum some, and blew in the rest. So that was my first job. And funnily enough, that's where your dad ended up working, but I didn't know him when he worked there. I never met him then. What I did on a Friday night? Well, that was great.
On a Friday night, we used to go out. It'd probably go out with Roger, mostly to start off with, and then had a friend, Ken Hodson, and Edward used to come with us sometimes, Jeff Adamson.
On a Friday evening, socialising with friends was usually, we'd all meet at somebody's house. I'd met a crowd who lived over Stockton Heath, Grappenhall way. So I used to usually drive over to Sue's. She lived in Bowden, pick Sue up, drive back over to Grappenhall, Stockton Heath, and we'd meet at somebody's house, and then we'd all pile on into various cars and motorbikes and head off to a pub somewhere in the heart of Cheshire.
Friday nights there was always a disco in the church hall at Padgate. One week it'd be in Padgate Church Hall, the following week it'd be in Woolston Mission.
We usually go to the wheat sheaf at Broom Edge, where we'd meet Ken Gibbon in there. He worked for Roger's dad.
We'd go to the whipping stocks. We used to go to one near Oulton Park as well. That was, I think it was called the Red Lion. That was quite popular.
And Mr. Carmer, my mum's neighbour that lived across the road from Nana, he used to run the village. He used to run it every Friday. And the whole school used to go. Everybody went. I went from being about 14. And we used to go on a Friday night. And then I used to go with Kathleen Glover, who was a great friend of mine, and Gaynor Austin, who was a friend of mine. There was a crowd of us went.
He was a great mentor to Roger and I. He taught us a lot about mechanics and mending cars and things. He was very interested in that. He was a wonderful bloke. He was old enough to be our dad, but we spent a lot of time with him.
I usually used to drive. I'd have Mum's car, which was a Morris Minor with a split windscreen. The most I ever had in it was 8, but don't tell Mum.
And on the way, 3 of us used to put some money in a kitty, and we used to go and buy 10 woodbines at the shop on the way, and we'd split them up into 3 each and a third. Well, I used to smoke my third, and I absolutely hated it, so I used to end up giving my other 3 away because I hated smoking. From being 14 when we tried it, I hated it.
Go in the week sheep, probably 1 or 2 other pubs, have 4 or 5 pints, and then jump in our cars and race to the chip shop in Partington for fish and chips, which wouldn't be seen as the thing to do nowadays. But nobody seemed to bother in those days.
I used to love driving, so if I couldn't get Mum's car, sometimes one of our friends' dad would lend us a car. So Joy's father had I think it was a Wolseley 1660, it was quite a big car, and he used to say that we could borrow it as long as Ron drives, and I really loved driving, so I thought it was great to get my hands on all these different cars that friends' dads had.
We used to go to the Mission or to the village hall at Padgate, and we'd have a brilliant night. And I remember going one night, and it was a hot pot supper, and there was a lot of elderly people there. It was a different venue. I think this was a Saturday night, but it was a hot pot supper in a disco, and we went, and it was the first week that Chubby Checker brought out Twist Again like we did last summer, and we were all up on the dance floor twisting, and all these old ladies were sat around the edge saying, they're going to have heart attacks, they're going to have a heart attack. So that was really quite funny.
I did that for quite a few years, and then of course people get married and get girlfriends, and you drift apart then. But they were good times, happy days.
And then end of the evening I'd take Sue back to Bowden, and so I did quite a bit of driving really, but it was good fun. They were a good crowd, and we used to go away camping together and go to motorsports and all sorts of things like that.